Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming Diablo 4, and I'm about to say it. Welcome back to Bone Spear. Yep, despite Season 2 massively changing the relevance of crit and vulnerable damage types, despite the specific Bone Spear nerfs that cut the potential in half, in theory, despite it all, it remains not only one of the best builds for Necromancer, but one of the best builds in the game. If you're unaware, the race to World First 100 was achieved by a Necromancer. In fact, the 4 Necromancers in Season 2 that made it to level 100 before anyone else were all playing Bone Spear. After the testing I've been doing, I can safely say that Bone Spear is the best option for a Necromancer overall because it can tackle all content where the other builds have issues. We're facing boss fights more than ever, for example, to farm specific uniques and even ubers, and Bone Spear is simply the best option for single target for that content. We're pushing higher tiers in Nightmare Dungeons on average anyway, and Bone Spear is a fantastic way to do that. And if you're simply speed clearing Nightmare Dungeons nearer to your level, maybe you're still leveling and there's open world content to be doing, it's a top tier pick there. Today I cleared Uber Lilith so effectively that I completely skipped most of her mechanics, dealing so much damage in burst that I was able to bypass almost all of the dangerous ones that you got to look out for, and this was with what I consider right now an incomplete build in terms of the ideal resource aspect that I'm still missing, and how a few of my Paragon glyphs aren't even level 15 yet. Today I also cleared a tier 94 after clearing a tier 86 by playing slow and steady from long range, just like the first Necromancer to clear a tier 100 last season. The build only has more potential than this right now though, because I could in the future attain Uber uniques. And some of the things I've been seeing from Necromancers with them is hilarious. Personally, I don't have any Ubers though, and I was still able to clear Uber Lilith so effectively, and 100% I can clear a tier 100, having beaten that 94. I just need to actually get a tier 100. For some reason I keep getting 94s and 95s. And I did it all with a much more attainable build for a normal player, so why don't we explain all of it. As always, we'll begin with the skill tree, but I'm going to be really quick on this because it's the same as it always is. You start with a basic attack of Bone Splinters, enhance it and go for Acolyte. This helps you get extra crit strike chance, which is very important for this build. Obviously, you're maxing out Bone Spear and looking for item contribution like I have here. We enhance it and go for Paranormal for more crit strike chance with the Bone Spears. You want to improve your max essence with a build of this nature, so 3 out of 3 in unliving energy, and we want to improve the damage of our core skill, so imperfectly balanced, 3 out of 3. We also will need some corpses for a couple reasons. Huge Flesh will help us with that, so 3 out of 3 on that too. On the next tier, you'll notice I do not have Blood Mist. This is great for avoiding nasty bursts of damage, but considering I've cleared a 94 without it, and also Uber Lilith solo, and I did not need it, I don't think you do either, and I think those points are better spent elsewhere. We have 1 point into Corpse Explosion. This is literally just to be able to press the button, which will trigger our passive Fueled by Death. This gives us 9% times increased damage for 6 seconds whenever we do that, so we just pop it now and then to maintain this buff. We have to take 1 point into Grim Harvest, but that means it also gives us a bit of essence when we do it, which is nice. Next we have our Decrepify, leveled up to Abhorrent, so it has a chance to help reset cooldowns, but mainly it's the damage reduction of 20% to all affected, and the very strong slow, which actually improves our damage because we have benefits from that in the Paragon. Since we're cursing people, obviously we want the amplified damage, and we want to reduce the damage taken with Death's Embrace to the close targets, but we also deal more to them. Something I kind of wish that I would run when I'm doing tier 100 type of content, when I'm playing for long range, is Death's Reach, where that would be relevant, but if you're not trying to push tier 100s, you don't need this. On the next tier, of course, we have Corpse Tendrils, leveled up, enhanced to Plague, to make it so it's causing vulnerability when used. We have our Bone passives, 3 out of 3 Insurrection, Compound Fracture, and then Evulsion, the most important one, because it provides us with the most DPS increase. On the ultimate tree, it's Bone Storm as always, with Prime and Supreme. We're sacrificing all our minions, so we're taking Standalone and Memento Mori in their full, and 3 out of 3 in Inspiring Leader, which is actually better in Season 2, giving us some attack speed, which helps us generate essence, improve our crit strike chance, and throw Bone Spears faster, which is really nice. Finally, the key passive, Ossified Essence. As you'd expect, the more essence you have above 50, the more damage you deal with Bone skills. On the other hand, we have Book of the Dead, which is the same as it always is. Skeletal Warriors onto Skirmishers are sacrificed for the crit strike chance. Skeletal Mages are sacrificing Cold for the vulnerable damage increase. And finally, the Golem is Iron Golem for the massive crit strike damage improvement. Next up, we have the Vampiric Powers, which there's two sides to consider. Are you doing, say, single target content? Are you pushing tier 100s? And I suppose also your speed clearing. Basically, in all of them, you're going to be running Metamorphosis and the combo of Prey on the Weak, which massively improves your vulnerable damage, but also those that are affected by vampiric curses become vulnerable just by default. So those that we meta become vulnerable and we deal more to them. And it also provides us with a 4-second buff of Unstoppable after we evade. It's also an incredible evade. A cool trick you can do is run a pair of boots that improves your evade charges like I have here. This means I have 4 meta dashes whenever I want, constantly refreshing, and that is incredible when dealing with a tough endgame boss like Uber Lilith or say Duriel. However, you can run a pair of boots that just provides you that little sprint for 2 seconds, which is still very nice. It's up to you. So those are the guaranteed ones. Then we have a Cursed Touch, which spreads that vampiric curse as you deal damage to enemies, and then that can spread to more targets. It also means the stored souls deal more damage, but we don't really care about that. Spreading the curse allows us to spread vulnerability really effectively, and so I really like this for speed clearing and even pushing tier 100s where I'm doing it from long range safely, where I don't really want to meta dash into them and kill myself. So it's pretty damn good there, but I wouldn't recommend this in single target, since you should be able to meta dash through to apply the curse consistently in that scenario. In all scenarios, I am running Ravenous. It increases your attack speed by a massive amount based on your move speed, which as you can see my current bonus is 60%. Attack speed is really important in a build like this, so we can shoot out more bone spears faster. Then we have Undying. Casting skills heals you, keeping you alive, and if you're below 50% life, it doubles to 6%. Obviously very good. You could take out Undying or a Cursed Touch and slot in something like Resilience for more survivability. Every little bit of health that you're missing, you get an extra 1% damage reduction, and that stacks up a lot. This is actually really good for survival purposes. So those are the options that I swap between depending on what content I'm doing. Alright, time for the big one. It's the rather complex Paragon board that is actually pretty much what we run every time, with some interesting things to talk about, but that was a quick scan over so you could see the whole thing. Let's start from the beginning. On the starter board, we're doing what we're doing with most builds, coming from the right, picking up Prime and heading to the Glyph, where we have Essence. I do not have level 15 on Essence, so on the starter board it fits really well because I can get it going. This improves your crit strike damage, but also massively improves the crit strike damage itself to enemies that are not healthy, so I love this for Bone Spear, and we run it every time anyway. I activate the Dexterity in the way that you can see here, and I also come back down to pick up Resilience and the nodes around that for the survivability, where resistance to all elements is really important. Then we come up to the next board, which you should expect Bone Graft every time. It's the most important thing, massively improving our damage and a max Essence. I rotate the board so I can come around to the right and pick that up immediately, while also picking up Entomb and some of the rare nodes around it. We don't really care about the potion healing, so I only pick one of those up to make sure to get to this magic node here. Then we work our way up to the left, where we're obviously picking up Reinvigorate and all of the nodes around that for max Essence and more Essence on kill, and then work our way up to Calcified for the big crit strike damage improvements to Bone Skill and Bone Skill damage in general. Then we come up to the left to work our way up and around to the Exploit Glyph, improving our vulnerable damage massively, which improves as we deal more damage to vulnerable enemies. We come around this to the top to also pick up Shaper of Bone and the magic nodes around that, and on the way out I also come and pick up the resistance to all elements, although I come back and do this later once I'm level 100 for the extra points to do this. Then we come down to the left to our next board, where we actually have Scent of Death. If you're only just reaching your third board, I would actually recommend you pick up Flesh Eater instead, which is what I did. But the reason that Scent of Death is here first is because of the important rare nodes like Corrective and Ruin, which if they're on my fourth board, I can't seem to activate in a consistent way. So I put Scent of Death third, so these activate so I can get extra crit strike damage and extra damage to healthy enemies, which massively improves my burst. We enter the board and come straight to the left to grab the Territorial Glyph, reducing the damage taken from close enemies by 10%, and also giving us another way to improve a different type of damage with close damage enemies. I also go ahead and pick up Deathmark just because why not, and Preservation for the defensive. Then we come down and pick up the Scent of Death itself for the big damage reduction that provides, and before moving on we come around and make sure to pick up Corrective for that bonus. Then we will head down to the left to pick up Ruin and all the nodes around that, and come down to our next board, which as I showed earlier is Flesh Eater. Consuming 5 corpses gives you a 40% times increase to damage for 6 seconds. A massive burst of damage. So we are popping corpses now and then for the one singular 6-second buff that we already have. And then if we're going to burst down, say, a pack of elites or a boss that's going to take longer than just a second, I can pop a bunch of corpses, proc Flesh Eater here, and absolutely destroy it. Very important in single target fights that go on for more than a second. We enter the board and come around to the right, picking up Stifle and the nodes around that, coming around to the left and picking up Flesh Eater, and then going straight down to our next glyph, which is Control, massively improving our damage to CC'd enemies, 10% times for the slowed enemies and 20% times for stunned enemies. Incredible for clearing nightmare dungeons, whether that's your own level or you're pushing higher tiers. Less effective in single target, but relevant there when you do stun them, and if you're playing in a 4-man it happens often enough, so it's still a massive DPS increase there. However, I have an alternative solution if you don't want to use this for single target content you're going to be focusing, and that is Amplify. Enemies affected by curse skills take 10% times increased damage from you, which means all those targets we're applying Decrepify, such as a single target in the boss fight, this would give you a consistent 10% times, not relying on the CC that happens occasionally. So that's what I would swap out there. I also pick up some of the resistance to all elements stuff, but again, I pick this up later once I'm level 100 for the extra points. You want to progress as far as you can to get to extra glyphs as soon as possible. We leave to the left, coming down to the color node, where we can pick up some extra attack speed, which is nice for a build like this, and then come up to the left where we have our final board, which isn't too relevant. I went for Wither just because of my current stats. I wanted to reach higher levels of resistance, especially for the high-end endgame content that I'm doing. And what's nice about the Wither board is it comes with extra shadow resistance, and with the glyph that I planned on putting there, this actually enhances those magic nodes. So on the Wither board, we enter from the left and come straight up to the rotated glyph socket, which I have Sacrificial here. This just gives you a straight 10% times increased damage when you have no active minions, so that's just permanent. The bonus of it's not that important. It boosts magic nodes within the range, so if you are lacking on shadow resistance, this can be great because it turns these 5% into 10%, and there's 3 of them that you can get alongside the actual rare node, which is another 10%. So a lot of shadow resistance can be picked up there, and if you need it like I did, this was just a play I made. Alright, time for the gear section, where we're just going to jump straight into the aspects. We have 2 versions to consider, and the version I'm wearing right now is speed clearing and boss hunting. So we'll start with that. From top to bottom, we go from the helmet. The newly buffed Deathless Visage in Season 2 is now stronger. The explosion that's added to it can be increased by 5% times for every 30% of your crit strike damage bonus, so it makes that explosion much more potent and relevant, which is very nice. On the chest, I have Might, which provides us 20% damage reduction flat out. It's not armor, it's not specific element resistance, it's everything. So every 5 seconds, I send out a basic attack in the form of bone splinters, and I maintain this 20% damage reduction. Majorly relevant when boss hunting, and just pretty much the only damage reduction we need when speed clearing and farming XP in nightmare dungeons or open world content relatively near our own level. On the gloves, of course, it's Serration, that sort of situation with the Ossified Essence key passive that was changed in Season 2, allowing for more damage as you cast Bone Spears when you have more essence at the time. Next is the big one, Tibalt's Will. Up to 40% times increased damage on everything while unstoppable, and for 4 seconds after. When you become unstoppable, you simply gain 50 of your primary resource. So pretty much every single time you use this, you get 50 essence, which is absolutely ludicrous. And then you have 40% times damage. The way that we get unstoppable in this build, as I explained, is through meta dashing, and that's why I really like a pair of boots that come with extra evade charges, so we can always have this buff going, massively improving our damage and giving us a way to consistently get 50 essence on demand. So this is ridiculous and you absolutely want it, but there is a time when I swap it out, as I'll explain. Finally, we have the boots, which is Ghost Walker, of course. While unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, you get that movement speed increase, which is very nice just for ease of life as a slow necromancer. But also with us using Ravenous, this actually scales attack speed potential based off of your move speed, so that's also relevant. On the weapon, you're going to want a 2-hand sword for the inbuilt critical strike damage stuff, and of course we're still running Splintering to maximize it as much as possible on a 2-hand weapon. On the amulet, it's still Grasping Veins, the massive gain to your crit strike chance, which is very important when you use your corpse tendrils. And those affected by the corpse tendrils, you deal 60% times bonus crit strike damage to, so it's a massive DPS increase. Then we have the rings. This is where things get awkward. We have the newly buffed Torment here that has the 170% times for 4 seconds improvement to your essence regen. This triggers when you get crit strikes with bone skills, which is basically always. What I would prefer in this slot is the exposed flesh aspect, which is absolutely broken. By dealing damage to vulnerable enemies, you basically have a chance to give yourself a load of essence. It happens constantly, especially when you're attacking multiple targets, and it next to solves your essence issues. So I'd rather have that, but for some reason, it's a really rare aspect, and I still haven't found one in Season 2, despite some serious target farming. I am very sad to not have it, and let me tell you, I really tried. As an alternative to that, then, you want to run Torment. And if you're still having essence issues, then you can run a second ring in the form of Umbral, restoring essence whenever you crowd control an enemy. If you crowd control a bunch of enemies with, say, Corpse Tendrils or Decrepify, that's going to give you a ton of essence. But if you're managing okay, then you should run the Ring of Sacrifice, improving the bonuses of your sacrifices, meaning I get an extra % crit strike chance permanently, meaning I get an extra 4% times vulnerable enemy damage, and I get an extra 8% times on my critical strike damage. So it's massive. If you can get away with it, run that. But as I said, I'll swap my setup if I'm pushing tier 100s. To do that, I will take off the unique helmet and off the unique legs, so that on my helmet I have Might, and then on my chest piece I have Shielding Storm for a potent Bone Storm barrier, and on my legs I have Disobedience. Basically, I run 3 defensives, the main ones we all use. This keeps me alive when I'm facing tier 100s and that kind of content, because otherwise I simply get blown up. So that's my defensive setup for a tier 100. Otherwise, I run the uniques in all other scenarios. Alright, for affixes, it's pretty much standard fare. On your amulet, you're going to want Ranks of Evulsion, it's your strongest passive, and on your gloves, you're going to need as many levels as Bone Spear as you can get. After that, you're looking for a crit strike chance, max essence, and essence generation. These are your priorities. And then things like crit damage and vulnerable damage after that. You can also get core skill damage improvements on your weapon, which is obviously really good. Defensively, it's the standard stuff of raw damage reduction, armor, and max health. And then after that, you're looking for things like damage reduction from far or close enemies. In terms of gems, we have rubies in our armor for the max health, we have the emeralds to improve the critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, and then in my jewelry, it's whatever you need. I wanted to reach 70% resistance in most resistances, so I needed a bit more poison resistance, so I put that into my amulet. I needed a bit more fire resistance, so I put that into a ring, and then everything else was okay, so I just put 5% resistance to all elements. It's up to you to find the balance that works for your current set, whatever you're lacking. But I will say that poison, fire, and shadow seem to come up most as a problem for me. So, we come to the gameplay guide. As I've been mentioning, there's 2 sides to it. Are you doing single target or speed clear content, or are you doing the tier 100 pushes? For pushing tiers, you want to go defensive. As I just explained, I drop the uniques and work in Shielding Storm and Disobedience instead through those slots. Bone Spear can be a bit of a glass cannon, so if you shore it up with these defensives, you can push harder content, such as a tier 100 like I've been doing. However, if you're doing normal content, speed clearing, farming single target bosses, you want to just have Might as your defensive aspect and run like the unique helm and legs as talked about. Tibalt's Will then means you need to be aware that every time you meta dash, you massively improve the damage you're dealing and give yourself 50 essence. So you need to continuously be meta dashing to maintain that buff, or meta dashing intentionally to apply that buff whenever you're about to burst an elite or something. On the other hand, if you're slow playing it and pushing content, you play from max range safely as far as possible and CC the enemies wherever you can with Decrepify and Corpse Tendrils. You want them on the edge of your screen so they're not dealing any damage to you. Apply Bone Storm whenever you need to burst down packs of strong enemies like elites or otherwise, using it as a defensive in the way that it also protects you with health and a barrier, but also to burst down the enemies as fast as possible. In this scenario, you also want to make sure you're sending out a Bone Splinters, even if it's going into nothing, to proc Might basically every 5 seconds, so you always have that damage reduction. Outside of that stuff, it's just classic Bone Spear with new Vampire Powers. You don't have to think about them too much, just dash through some targets to apply Vampiric Curse to them whenever you need to. Alternatively, you can just not think about that and use a Curse Touch like I do. And then as normal, just apply Decrepify to everything always, maintain your corpse related buffs by popping corpses now and then, or up to 5 of them at once if you're planning on bursting a boss or an elite. Always tendril groups and blast them in big strong AoE, and whenever you're attacking, try to have higher essence for every bone spear that you throw. If you're getting to 50 or lower, you want to stop and generate some essence so that your bone spears don't hit like a wet noodle. With the right setup though, the right aspects, you don't really worry about essence all that much. You generate essence by throwing bone spears, which is ridiculous. God, I want exposed flesh. But in general, just throw bone spears, tons of them, and watch them blow up everything like a point and click adventure that, yeah, this build just kind of is. But there you have it, another build video down, and even more testing complete on my end. Bone Spear is stupid. For some reason, it's lower rated than, say, Infamous by many, which is silly. I think that's just wrong. It's the best spec for late game leveling, evidently. It's the best spec for single target, which is a major aspect of our new endgame. I think more people are going to clear the bosses and farm the bosses for Ubers and all the uniques they want, a lot more than they're ever going to push a tier 100, which doesn't really have content and rewards that are relevant in Season 2. The build is fantastic for speed clearing or open world content. There's no build up or damage over time needed. It just kills everything instantly. And obviously, it's more than capable at pushing higher nightmare tiers if that's something you want to do for fun. I would argue that, yeah, that's the place Infamous stands out and is probably better, like high tier nightmare dungeon pushing. But I think I'd call Bone Spear and Infinite Mist S tier together for different reasons and different content. And they're clearly the best options for Necromancers in Season 2. But yeah, I hope this video was able to help you. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.